I am Alessandra Venturini, the holder of the Jean Monnet Chair in European Migration Studies. I'm very glad to open the final lecture of the seminar Mineu, Driver of Migration in the European Neighborhood, and to have as a guest of the last, as speaker of the last lecture, Philippe Fargues. Philippe Fargues is a very well-known scholar, demographer and sociologist working in the Mediterranean. He has been professor at European University Institute in Florence. He was founder and director of the Migration Policy Center as well at European University Institute. He also was founding director of the Consortium for Applied Research on International Migration, Karim, and director of the summer school, of the Migration Summer School. He has been also director of the Center for Migration Refugees Study of the American University of Cairo, senior researcher at the French National Institute of Demography, the INED. He was visiting professor at Harvard, director of the Center for Economic and Legal Social Study in Cairo. As you know, you understand, he has worked so much and is now working in the Arab country, in the Saudi Arabia, in the Gulf country. His research interests include migration, refugees movement, population, politics in the Muslim countries, family building, demography, and development. He's published in this topic, lectured on this topic in many universities in Europe, America, Africa, and the Middle East. Philippe, the floor is yours. We are all very glad that you accept our invitation.
For discussion. So let me start now with my topic, migration, which is population movements between countries, is very much part of demographic reproduction in any country of the world. And we are going to deal with 2 points of view. First, total population growth. And you may know that the growth of any population is the combination of 2 elements: natural population increase, which is the difference between birth and death, and net migration, which is the difference between immigration and emigration. So we are going to explore 5 questions, which are listed on the slide you have against you. First question is, how do natural increase and migration combine to determine population growth? As you will see, there are very marked patterns of population growth between the 3 regions I've just mentioned. The second question is emigration a response to population pressures in South and Eastern Mediterranean countries? And we are going to explore that question from 2 points of view. First, density. Density is a proxy for the pressure of population on economic resources. And the second point of view will be structure. And we will focus particularly on the youth bulge, which is a pressure of young people, not on economic resources as much as on social and political resources. The third question will be, why did birth rates decline later and on a smaller scale in South and Eastern Mediterranean countries? And in particular, with regard to migration, what are the uncertainties that are borne by these high birth rates in the countries south and east of the Mediterranean, and what is the relevance of that particular demographic pattern with regard to international migration? The fourth question will be, will the Gulf states continue to be a massive destination for migrants coming from the South and Eastern Mediterranean countries? And the fifth and last question will be, will Europe need replacement migration in a connection with its own demographic patterns. So first question, migration as a component of population change. We can go to the next slide, please, Alessandra. Yes, thank you very much. So in my slide, you will have only graphs. I'm sorry about this, but writing text on slides would have been too long. So on this PowerPoint, you can see three regions: South and Eastern Mediterranean, Gulf states, and Europe, and three very contrasted patterns of demographic reproduction, of population growth. In the South and Eastern Mediterranean countries, population growth is driven mainly by natural increase, which is still high or very high. Net migration is negative because you have more emigrants than you have immigrants, but it is important to note that net migration is too small to offset rapid natural population growth, rapid natural increase. So this is the pattern in the South and Eastern Mediterranean countries. Now let us move to the first destination of these immigrants from South and Eastern Mediterranean countries, which are the Gulf states. The Gulf states have a very particular pattern of demographic growth, of population growth, by which both natural increase and net migration are very high. Actually, the Gulf states have today the world's fastest rates of population growth. Here two remarks. First remark, the overall birth rates are reduced by immigration. So let me say a few words about that. In the Gulf states, immigration is mainly immigration of workers and single workers, meaning that the demographic reproduction of these workers will take place in their country of origin. And this is why the overall birth rates of the Gulf states are reduced by the particular migration patterns that they have. The second remark is that the Gulf states are particular societies with, let us say, patriarchal models of families, and these models are conveyed by migrants to their origin countries through a process which is usually called social or ideational remittances. And as a result of that process and of the patriarchal values that are conveyed by migrants back to their home countries, immigration to the Gulf states might result in increases in fertility in the origin countries of migrants. The third graph is on Europe, and first, the lines are much, much lower than in the two other regions, and both natural increase and net migration in Europe are small, at least in relative terms compared with the Gulf states or the South and Eastern Mediterranean countries. Also in Europe, sustained immigration combined with low natural increase, which is now negative, is resulting in migration, in net migration being the only positive component of population growth. In other terms, without immigrants, populations in Europe would decline today, as it is already the case in Germany, for example. And Italy is not very far from that. So this is the very particular pattern of Europe. Interestingly, demographers and social demographers have developed models. One is what they call the second demographic transition, which is a model describing the persistently low or below reproduction level of fertility linked with delayed or cancelled marriage. And the second one is the third demographic transition model, according to which local populations would be silently but inexorably replaced by non-European migrants coming from other parts of the world. I want to warn you about that model, which is, I think, very wrong, because people and colleagues who have developed that model of a third demographic transition just do not take into account what happens on the field, what happens in the real world, in the real population, which is that mixed parenthood makes of two populations a third one, which is a new population. So you cannot say that one population is replacing the other. What is happening is, as it has always happened in history, the population is continuously renewed by migration and other processes. So now let us move to my second question, which is population pressures and immigration from South and Eastern Mediterranean countries. So now we move to the following. Where are we now? Yes, that's very good. We can stay on this one. So population pressure, I will consider from 2 points of view. As I said, the first one is the pressure exerted by density on resources, and in particular on inhabitable land in this part of the world. And you have to consider that a large part of South and Eastern Mediterranean countries is covered by dry lands or by desert areas. The density, the pressure of population on land can be extremely high. And of course, the highest pressure you have on land is in Egypt. If you consider only inhabitable land of Egypt, it is uh, the highest density in the world. And the common sense would say that high density produces high emigration, or if you prefer, negative net migration. Well, look at the graph you have. This is just not the case at all. The reality is different. The reality is that you have, and it is a particular also, and I will explain this, a positive relationship between density and net migration, meaning that high density is more associated with immigration than with immigration in this part of the world. This is very much linked to non-economic factors. This is linked to the high prevalence of refugee movements in a number of countries of the South and Eastern Mediterranean region, in particular in Turkey, in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Iraq, etc. So first, density, the pressure of population numbers on land is not a factor of migration, of emigration in this part of the world. Now, let us move to the next slide, please, which will consider another aspect, thank you, which will consider another aspect of population pressure, which is the pressure exerted by young adults. And young adults, for me, is the population aged between 20 and 34 years of age. And that particular population exert a pressure, of course, on economic resources, but also on political resources. Why is it so? Because the youth bulge, which is the high numbers of young people you have, is very much associated with high unemployment, with dissatisfaction of the young people, with political unrest, etc., etc. So that is, you can see in the slide that we are actually currently in a period of extremely high proportion of young adults in all the countries of the South and Eastern Mediterranean. Actually, the peak was 10 years ago, in the beginning of the 2010s. Here, I want to make three remarks. First remark, the age group 20-34, or more precisely around 25 years of age, is the typical age at international migration. It is the age at which typically young people leave their country when they leave their country of origin. And then we can move to the next slide, please, Alessandra. Yes, next slide. Okay, thank you very much. So as you can see here, you have the distribution of immigrants in the European countries actually by age, and you see that the distribution is very, very particular. There is a maximum between 20 and 35 years of age when you have almost half of migration, of international migration taking place. This is, of course, this has a number of explanation. The first is that leaving one's countries, and possibly for a lifetime, is something that will cost you money. It is a non-errors undertaking. You have some time, and very often, I would say, to borrow money for this. And the returns from your migration are deferred. You will not earn enough money very soon in order to make your move a benefit. You have to wait for this. And waiting, you can wait when you are young. You cannot wait when you are no longer young. So this is a strong factor explaining why everywhere and at any time, migration, international migration, is particularly a phenomenon of young people. The second is that in this particular part of the world, in South and Eastern Mediterranean countries, net migration, which is peaking at, let us say, young adult ages, has been linked very much with the political unrest that developed and was known as the Arab Spring or Arab revolts of the 2010s. There is a perfect time correspondence between youth bulge and revolts in the Arab region. So, and immigration from these countries. So, as you can see now, the youth bulge are diminishing, and maybe that can allow us to not to predict, but to assume that pressure will be declining and that emigration from these countries may be declining as well. The third remark I want to make about this, and this is, I think, an important remark when you think about debates about, for example, the brain drain, etc. Migration and education are extremely linked in the life cycle of individuals. And a big question is, where does education take place? Does it take place in the origin country of young migrants or in the destination countries? And looking at Eurostat data, I don't have the table in front of me now. Looking at Eurostat data from South and Eastern Mediterranean countries to Europe, you will see that more than 50% of that migration, precisely 52.5% of that migration, is at preschool, school, or university ages. So that's pretty much important. And this can be divided into two, 11.5% at university ages, and these are autonomous students, and 41.5% at dependent children ages. It clearly means that a large part of the education of migrants will take place not in the origin countries before migrating, but in the destination countries after migration took place. So that is an argument to mitigate the brain drain argument, which is so common in many circles, including international organizations like UNESCO or the World Bank, etc. Let me now move to my third question, which is about the future of an
Philippe, sorry, may I ask you something on this slide that you showed on the youth bulge?
yes,
We had at least two presentations that were stressing the education of the young of the Mediterranean,
yes,
saying that the education is increasing. And since what we show, the education is a factor that is migration.
of course,
So
education is a factor that
so
that
this decline in the youth bulge is not probably forecasting a reduction of the immigration because given the higher increase, the propensity to move will be higher. So this bulge is declining, but for migration forecast, this decline will be much less because the probability of moving, if you study, is larger. Am I
Okay, so
right or no?
I will make two remarks here. And the first remark is you are absolutely right. Education has been tremendously increasing in the origin countries of migrants. This does not affect at all what I said, which is that if we consider the whole cohort of migrants, that cohort will be comprised of
Less people.
50% people below the age of university, so these people will get education in the destination country rather than in the origin country. But yes, you're right, more educated people tend to migrate more than less educated people. That is right, and that is very much linked to unemployment of uh, young people in the countries of origin. Um, I don't have time to develop this here, but a very striking fact is that, let us say, until 30 years ago, until 30 or 40 years ago, unemployment was predominantly or exclusively the fact of uneducated people, of people with low or no education at all. So, or no school education at all, of illiterate people. This has completely changed over the last 40 years, and particularly, let us say, along the last 30 years. Why is it so? It is so because in these countries, you had programs in the past, uh, state programs to systematically provide a job to people with a diploma. And these programs are no longer working. So what is happening today is that the highest rates of unemployment are observed among people with university education. And to be more precise, with incomplete university education. This is what is observed in all or in most of these countries I'm talking about. So that is the first point, and you are right on this. Nevertheless, you have very interesting historical studies, and of course, you know the work of Hatton and Williamson, for example. And they very, very clearly showed that whatever the period and whatever the country, emigration in relative terms, rates of emigration from a country are very, very much linked with the proportion of people, of young people, of people aged around 25. So that is another fact which is a fact observed in the past. It does not mean, of course, that it will continue to be like this. And you are right, it may well change, but it may also well not change. This we don't know. It may be that migration will increase among older people, among people, let us say, above 40 years of age. But so far, this is not what we observe. So, but you may be right. It may happen. Okay. So I don't know if I was clear enough on this, and if I can continue, or if you want to stop a bit longer on that point.
No, 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 no.
Okay, okay. So let us move now to the next slide, please, which is about the delayed demographic transition in the South and Eastern Mediterranean countries and its links with immigration. An interesting point, and you don't have that on the slide because I don't have time to show everything, is that youth bulges south of the Mediterranean took place 2 or 3 decades later than in other Asian and Latin American countries. The decline of fertility in the South and Eastern Mediterranean countries, and in particular in the eastern part of these countries from Egypt to Iraq, was delayed and is still unfinished. And on that slide, you can see something very interesting, which is that for these countries, the United Nations projections of total populations were revised. And the last version of this projection is much, much higher than the projection made a decade before in 2012. So that fact is something which is a bit puzzling. Why is it that fertility remained high in a number of these countries? And why is it that it increased in some of these countries, at least in 2 of these countries, which are Algeria and Egypt? So is it religion that explains this? Is it Islam's gender-related values and behaviors that would explain high fertility, etc.? I don't think so. To cut it short, we have counterexamples. One big counterexample is Iran, and Iran, which is undoubtedly a very Islamic country with a very theocratic government. Iran had the world's fastest demographic transition ever observed during the period of the Ayatollah. A second example is Algeria. Algeria, which had a strong decline of its fertility in the 1990s, which is a period when the country was the grip of Islamist violence. Another example outside the Middle East is Indonesia. Indonesia is the world's largest Islamic country, but with a relatively low total fertility rate, 2.3 children per woman. So religion is not a sufficient factor for me. Would it be then political economy? Many of the South and Eastern Mediterranean countries are depending upon oil directly, depending like the large exporters of oil, Libya, Algeria, Iraq, or indirectly through the aid they receive from oil countries or remittances from their workers, migrants in the oil states. And here I'm referring to Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, etc. Oil income has made it possible to have a number of a variety of mechanisms for the state to subsidize family, to subsidize fertility, to subsidize the cost of children, etc. So if you lift the cost of children, then not changing the values behind high fertility, you will increase the level of fertility. That was true at least until the end of the 1980s, when you had this big oil crisis. Today it is puzzling, as I said. Fertility decline is clearly unfinished. You have levels of fertility that are high in countries like Jordan, for example, Iraq, etc., with regard to their level of income per capita. And this is probably linked to the fact, according to me, to the fact that women's empowerment is unfinished. Women have access to education, to higher education, and even more than men. Interestingly, in most universities of this part of the world, you will find more women than men, but they don't have access or large access to employment. They have the world's lowest female participation rate, and that is very much I would say, a sociological factor that explains the persistence of high levels of fertility. Now, there are unanswered questions. Will fertility decline resume? And then will these countries have a lower population than the one which is projected by the United Nations? Second question is, will female education play its universal role of bringing women on the labor market outside the household? Third question is, will possible future youth bulges contribute to further immigration, etc., etc.? We have still a number of unanswered questions looking at the demography of this part of the world. What I want to say now is that there is a key, though unnoticed, consequence of the decline, though unfinished, of fertility in the South and Eastern Mediterranean countries. The decline of fertility in these countries has resulted into a shifting profile of migrants. So let me just try to be short on this, which is a rather complex phenomenon. You have two trends combining. On one side, migration always, today as yesterday, happens at, let us say, the age of 25 years. But on the other side, the situation of individuals at 25 years of age has completely changed. Until, let us say, 20 to 30 years ago, at 25 years, not only a young man or young woman was married, but they had already 2, 3, 4, 5 children. So migration of a single person without the members of his or her family would be followed very soon by family reunification in the destination country. Today, it is not at all the case. A typical migrant at 25 years of age does not have a family left behind in the country of origin, meaning that family reunification, which had become the main factor of migration in many European countries in the last decades, will no longer continue to be a strong dimension of international migration. Why is it so? Because most migrants now have postponed their family building, and they don't have a spouse when they leave the country of origin. Okay, this is very schematic what I say, but we have to pay attention to this big shift into the situation of migrants. Now I see that it is already very late. I will tackle very briefly my last 2 points, which is about the Gulf states. The Gulf states have been an important destination for migrants from South and Eastern Mediterranean, and the most important one, more important than Europe, for all the migrants from Egypt to Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, Iraq, etc., until today. It is the case. But for many reasons which I do not have time to develop here, we should not consider that migration will continue. That migration may well stop in the near future. It may well stop because the Gulf states have realized that they suffered a double dependency upon labor migration, labor imports, and dependency upon oil exports. And they want to be freed from these two dependencies. Being freed from these two dependencies means, on the one side, reducing immigration by replacing migrants with nationals, and on the other side, reducing the importance of oil in the economies by increasing the importance of knowledge-based economies. And this is what is very much happening today in the Gulf states. And what will happen, to make a long story short, is that according to me, unskilled labor imports to the Gulf states will drastically diminish, while the entry of highly skilled national citizens on the labor market will spectacularly increase, replacing high-skilled immigrants on these labor markets. So the Gulf states are still a very important destination for migrants from Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, etc. But it might well not be the case in the near future. Now Europe, and this is my last point, so perhaps, Alessandra, you could please move to the, not the last one, but the prior to, yes, okay, that is very good, thank you very much, slide. So how does Europe's demographic future look like? That is an important question. Looking at the population above 20 years of age, you cannot predict easily the population before 20 years, below 20 years, because you have to predict fertility, which is a big unknown value. But above 20 years of age, you can predict, because these people are already born today, if we consider, for example, the period 2020 to 2040. Then in the no migration scenario of Eurostat projections, and listen to what I'm going to say, the population aged 20 to 45 in the European Union will lose 26.3 million, which is an 18% loss. The population aged 45 to 65 will lose 14.2 million, which is an 11% loss. And the population aged 65 and over will gain, not lose, gain 31.9 million, which is a 34% gain. So the equation is very simple. To offset the loss of 40 million working age people between 20 and 65 years of age, you have two solutions: either replacing the missing working age persons by older persons, which would mean elevating the working age's upper limit, or retirement age from 65 to 71.8 years of age. And believe me, in France today, that would not be very popular. And the second, what?
French will be happy. The French peoples will be happy.
Yes, exactly what I said. I'm in Paris today, and I can tell you that yesterday the atmosphere was very bad about this. So, and the second solution, of course, would be admitting immigrants to fill the gap. So I would have liked to say a few words about aging. I don't know, Alessandra, if I have still 5 minutes to talk about aging, or 3 minutes?
No, please do.
Okay, so aging is something which is a challenge in Europe. And you have two aspects of aging. One is individual aging, aging of individuals from the moment they are born to their death. That is a continuous and irreversible process. The second aspect is aging not of individuals, but of populations. And that is a reversible aspect that combines two distinct phenomena. One is increasing longevity, as we know, aging at the top for demographer, because you increase the proportion of people who are going to live above 70, 75, 80, etc. Years of age. And the second one is decreasing fertility, and this is aging at the bottom of the age pyramid, which is decreasing the proportion of young people. But the question is aging good or bad for European economies? And the answer to that question is very different whether you look at individual aging or population aging. Looking at individual aging, you say, well, individual aging could bring benefits to the economies. Why could it bring benefits? Because with aging, your experience increases, and experience can compensate for eroding cognition, because when you get older, your cognition capacities are decreasing. But replacing that with experience can be good after all. So old worker today can be much better than the same individuals where they were young workers 30 years ago. And the second good news about individual aging is that the most skilled workers are those who are retiring later. So the average level of skill increases with age. These are the good news. But now looking at the other aspect of aging, which is population aging, then aging may well harm and not bring benefits at all. And why is it so? It is so because old workers today, compared with young workers today, maybe are not as good as they look like if we compare old workers today with what they were themselves, where they were young. Why is it so? Because formal education increases from one generation to the next, and not only formal education, but education that is up to date, that is adapted to economic changes, etc. Not only economic changes, but to economic changes in particular. So aging, population aging, then is the reduction of the share of young generations in the population. It is equivalent to an aging of skills. It is what I call skills aging. And then the only response I can think of as a demographer would be replacement migration. If you are losing these skills and you cannot, because you are missing the young people and you cannot find these skills in the old people, then you will have to find these skills in other population and bring them through replacement migration. And this is not something which is very massive. I made the calculation. We should think of 26.3 million in 20 years, meaning 1.3 million per year, which is very, very realistic at the level of the European Union today. It is, after all, what's happening today, not more, not less. So what is important, of course, is looking at the skills of these migrants and certainly adapting the skills that are needed not only today, but that will be needed tomorrow is something which is important when we are thinking of migration as a replacement process, as a response to population aging. And my last point will be, because we are talking about the South and Eastern Mediterranean, is a question. Will Europe need migrants coming from South and Eastern Mediterranean? Well, and Alessandra, please, last slide. Thank you. Of course, if we look at numbers, that would be okay. But if we look at skills, I'm not sure at all. I'm not sure at all. And I know that you have a number of people advocating the strong playing on complementarities between north and south of the Mediterranean. I'm not sure it will work. I'm not sure it will solve all the problems that we may have on our labor markets, and that the countries of the south may also have on their labor markets. It can play a partial role, but probably not solve the whole problem. Thank you very much. So I can see that we still have 1 minute for the discussion.
Yes, I interrompo la conversation. Philippe, thank you very much. Your presentation was very interesting. I have a couple of questions. I wonder if Uh, my point is that you don't think that the aging skill can be coped with training, with updating. So now you accumulate your level of knowledge, the beginnings of your life, and you go on with it. We are academic, we spend all our life studying. So in a certain way, we invest every day in our human capital. But instead, the professional don't do it. You don't think probably that something we should change in given that the innovation is so rapid in the management of skill of the worker, and the company should invest in this, given that the retirement age is extended, and you want new people. And the second one, which is more on the demographic side, I think that Europeans are not afraid of migration from the Mediterranean country. They are used to migrants coming from the Mediterranean country, but what they really are afraid, especially because we find newspapers that present this demographic transition in a very dramatic way, from the migration from sub-Saharan Africa, where the fertility rate is 5%. And I was very impressed by what you said, that the Arab country, which could be a destination country for the African migrant, are trying to reduce the inflow. So I would like you to comment on the more especially on the second one, which is also today on the Corriere della Sera. There is an article of Panebianco, who is a political scientist, not a demographer, not somebody on the field, who was analyzing the fertility of sub-Saharan Africa in a dramatic way.
Okay, so I will address these two questions. The first one, this is not demography, but I read a number of studies showing that the way your cognitive capacities transform into productivity, into labor productivity, and also into creativity, continue to follow a reverse U-shape line according to age. Well, to cut it short, you can make progress until the age of 50, but it becomes extremely difficult to continue to progress above that age of 50. So there is a literature on this, which is not demographic literature, but I cannot say more than that on this aspect, except provide bibliography, which I myself read. The second aspect, which is about, let us not talk about migration from South and Eastern Mediterranean countries, which is also migration from Islamic countries. And I wish you were right, Alessandra, but I think that many people continue to fear this migration. But now let us talk about migration from Sub-Saharan Africa. Okay. First, you are right. Fertility is still high in Sub-Saharan Africa. It is around 4.5, 4.6 children per woman, compared with less than 3 in Northern Africa and with less than 2 in Europe. So obviously, a large part of future demographic growth will be in Sub-Saharan Africa, and the entire world's population growth will be exclusively in Sub-Saharan Africa, according to UN projections, starting from, I don't know when, let us say, 2050 or 2060. So this is a demographic prediction, but yet it has a high probability to be not too far from what will happen. Let us now look at migration patterns from Sub-Saharan Africa. Yes, migration from Sub-Saharan Africa to European countries has increased in in recent years, but the, the the largest part, and by very far the largest part of flows of migration from sub-Saharan African countries is destined for other sub-Saharan African countries. Okay, so it is intra-Africa migration. Now, will it continue to be so? I am not sure. Some people say, look, that will not happen. We will not have large migration from sub-Saharan Africa and Europe because they go to other sub-Saharan African countries. What's happening is not only Northern African countries are closing their borders to migrants from sub-Saharan Africa, but also other sub-Saharan African countries are closing their borders to sub-Saharan migration, like South Africa, for example, like Côte d'Ivoire, like other countries are closing their borders. Why is it so? Because we, Westerners, have exported a model in sub-Saharan Africa, and that model is the nation state. And the nation state is not very much open to other people that don't share the territory, the narrative, and etc., etc. You know, so yes, we don't know what will happen with migration from sub-Saharan countries. My assumption is that we have to expect more of that migration into Europe. There is no reason why it should not take momentum. In particular, if we look at what will happen in terms of climate change, and this is another topic, of course.
Okay. Yes, I remember that you always tell the story that the migration in Africa were inside the African region, also because for many sub-Saharan African countries, the frontier don't exist. So there is not this idea of nation states. And only recently, Ivory Coast, they're trying to rediscover the Ivory, I don't know how you say this, the culture of the state. This is what we exported for sure there.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Yet we exported also another thing, which is large areas of free circulation of people. There are these large areas of free circulation of people in Africa, in particular in West Africa. But yet, despite the fact that it's a free circulation of people area, Western Africa is not that open to long-term migration. You can move to Côte d'Ivoire for less than 3 months very easily, but stay there, work there, bring your family there, etc., etc. It becomes a problem, like it is a problem in Europe today. The last point I want to make is migration from sub-Saharan Africa to Northern Africa, to South and Eastern Mediterranean countries. It is very, very small. It has been incredibly exaggerated by politicians, but look at the numbers. The numbers are so small. You know, in Tunisia, for example, 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was that big fuss about declaration of the president about sub-Saharan Africans bringing cows in the country, etc. You know how many sub-Saharan Africans you have in Tunisia? Less than 20,000. In Morocco, same, less than 60 or 70,000. So these are very small numbers. Algeria a bit more, because Algeria is an old country and there is more money in Algeria. But yet Algeria is a country with a very strong anti-immigrant policy regarding people coming from Niger and other sub-Saharan countries. But the migrant population in Algeria from sub-Saharan Africa is around 150,000, not more than that. So we should not exaggerate at all.
Yes, but as you said, but the feeling is very strong, because in the first lecture there was Hassan Boubakri, that he is Tunisian. opportunity. He was exactly complaining about the importance, the attention to the migration of sub-Saharan Africans, and was not enough attention to the migration of Tunisia, because the migration of Tunisia took a new enthusiasm, a new life, exactly because the situation, the political, economic situation in Tunisia
Yes.
has changed, and the young want to leave. So, do you have any? Yes, Rosita.
Hi, Philippe. Thank you very much for this very interesting lecture that inspired me many consideration from my political, from my point of view that is a little bit political, if you want. And I'm just wondering, of course, there is an official discourse about migration, but your lecture could be seen as a counter narrative, as a counter official narrative, because of course you explain very well how of the dates and what you explain is completely at the opposite of the official narrative that I don't know explain that migrants are a massive presence in Europe and also in the Mediterranean, East Mediterranean countries. So my question is, for example, during the fascist era in Italy, demography has a very crucial role in the creation of a certain narrative about the regime. How and to what extent today demography is an important tool in the end of scholars, but also think tank in an effort to create a counter narrative, because I believe this is an important part of the story that your lecture explained very well and show very well. Thank you very much, Philippe.
No, you're absolutely right. Of course, this is a dimension which I did not develop at all, but the so-called demographic threat that would be caused by immigrants is very much part of the narrative of all those who have a nationalistic or identity narrative in our countries. And yes, this is an extremely important trend. But of course, it cannot resist any statistical analysis. But yet, and interestingly, that narrative, at least in France, I don't know the situation clearly in Italy, but in France, it was very well demonstrated that that narrative showing or trying to show that migrants are a threat for national identity, for national employment, for national whatever you want, security, etc. That narrative is extremely popular in areas where you don't have immigrants at all, So it's interesting. Those who are faced with the realities of immigration are not as anti-immigrants as those who are not at all, who do not know what migration is, So this is political discourse. This is a political discourse that is useful if you want to promote to promote certain sorts of ideas, but as I said, it cannot resist any statistical analysis. That is yes. The only thing you can demonstrate is that mixed marriages are increasing, and that mixed offspring resulting of migration is an increasing reality in a number of our societies. You can show that, but the rest you can't.
But it's very famous. As you know, Torino is a city of immigration. We had a lot of
Yeah.
immigration from the south. And one of our colleagues is from Naples. The landlady who was renting the house to him told him, now you are no more the problem. That means in the past you were the problem.
Yeah.
renting the house to somebody from Naples. Now we have renting the house to people from Morocco, Tunisia, and so on, you see. And that is a part of the culture in which people are afraid of the other, especially if they don't know the other.
Exactly, exactly.
Do you have, you see, the students like this, in general, they ask questions when the conference is finished. I'm obliged to answer them. Yes, please.
I cannot hear anything.
Yes, okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Well, my name is Paolo Viazzo. I'm an anthropologist with an interest in the demography and historical demography of the Mediterranean area. And I was wondering whether you think it might be useful to distinguish, to disaggregate, as it were, Europe into Northern Europe, perhaps, and Southern Europe or Mediterranean Europe. Because I know that there are books or articles which have been published recently, which suggest that actually, well, the demographic divide between the two shores is fading in a way. Well, actually, a few years ago, I know that in France, a book was published, edited by two population geographers, I think, named Thierry and Isabelle Bloss, entitled, Pensée le vieillissement en Méditerranée. And the main thrust of the thesis was that actually, although that the southern and eastern shores are aging, demographically aging very quickly, which means that in a matter of a few decades, they will be faced with the same challenges, particularly in terms of care, let's say, of coping with. It was because actually my impression is that your numbers focused the attention on the lack of workforce Europe is going to experience, but well, there are reasons to believe that particularly Southern Europe, where a familialistic welfare regime obtains, is facing probably, well, I would say the same challenges. I don't know what you think about that. And well, also in Italy now we have this. Well, we also a ministry, I think, but let's say encouraging fertility, as it were, and probably this leads us to the third demographic transition you mentioned. Because I know that there is an article published by somebody, actually it was my teacher, actually, David Coleman, in Population Development Review, where he says that, well, this new combination of people migrating from high fertility countries to low fertility countries, so very low fertility plus in migration may qualify for being let's say, considered to be a third demographic transition, which is, well, in neutral terms, might be correct or might be admissible. The problem is that I guess that there is this kind of right-wing flavor, actually, also in the title of that article, if I remember that correctly. It talks about ethnic changes and things like that. So it was just, I don't know, it's just something which your talk forced me to think about. That's...
Okay, thank you. These are, I think, more comments than questions, and I fully agree with you. Regarding the first point, which would be the geography of the divide between North and South. And of course, geographers are sometimes very good at looking at non-national scales of things, at micro-regional scales. And looking at that, I remember a number of maps showing that when you look at people living on the coastline of Europe and on the coastline of Africa, which is north of Algeria, Morocco, Tunisia, etc. The differences were not that big and were perhaps not as big as they can be between the coastline of the Mediterranean and the Baltic coastline, for example. So this is the idea of a continuum that would be linked with the depth of cultural exchanges between the two shores of the Mediterranean. I remember, for example, you are an anthropologist. I remember the work of this French anthropologist, Germaine Tillon, showing that you have many similar aspects in families between the two shores of the Mediterranean. And these aspects are not necessarily shared between those who are Mediterranean, who have a Mediterranean culture, and those even in the same country who do not have that Mediterranean culture, whether in northern of France or I don't know Italy, but France, or in southern part of Algeria, etc. So that is the first point, which is, of course, national boundaries are not always the most relevant boundaries if you want to understand social phenomenon. That is, but yet we cannot also dismiss the fact that the nation state is something that was created, but in its turn, it creates social realities. So that is my comments on your first point. The second point, the work of David Coleman. I know well David Coleman, of course, he's a colleague. I met him several times. And I think it tells a story that is very much appealing to the right wing, as you said, that very easily translated into other theories, like in France, the theory of the great replacement, that is a theory defended by a member of let us say, I would not call them social scientists, but more politicians. There is no statistical evidence into the theory of Coleman from 2 points of view, at least. The first point of view is that when you bring two populations together, they will not reproduce in complete isolation from one another. They will mix at a point. You will have mixed marriages. And that will create a third population, which is neither the first one nor the second one. This is an aspect that Coleman does not develop at all. The second aspect of what Coleman says well, migration is not only migration of people, it's migration of cultures. And these cultures will replace our cultures. Okay. He's a demographer, so we should bring the statistical evidence of this. I would really like to see that statistical evidence according to which a city like London would be today closer of Tehran or closer of Lahore or Karachi than it is of Aberdeen or Liverpool. You know, I would really see that. You don't have such statistical evidence, including when you use the current statistical tools that we have, like the poll, like the opinion surveys, etc. This is not true at all. So he does not demonstrate this. Apart from that, he's a very nice chap. Okay, I like him. He's a nice chap, but don't believe what he writes, because you can just, you know, you can deconstruct. I don't know if you probably read French. I could send to you a paper that I remember I wrote for a French journal, which is Esprit, the journal Esprit. And I wrote that was at the time of Sarkozy, so that Sarkozy invented a political campaign on national identity in France, France and identity. So I wrote about how this mechanism of migrants adopting and adapting ideas of the receiving population may be a powerful mechanism of diffusion from the ideas in the countries of destination to the countries of origin of migrants. So exactly the other way around, And the point is that migration, as many other flows, is a factor of evolution of cultures, but not at all one replacing the other one. It is very much a culture evolving towards something new, But okay.
Thank you very much, Philippe,
Okay.
to leave. So thank you very much, really very much for all your presentation. I will send you the video to revise before posting for the students. Thank you again.
Thank you to everyone. Thank you.
And we hope we have occasion to meet personally, not only online.
Yes, I hope so.
You will be in Florence soon?
Yes, I will return in 2 days, exactly. On Thursday, I will be in Florence.
After Pakistan, after other places.
Yes, I was in Pakistan and in the Gulf states, yes.
Yes, okay.
Yeah.
So, okay. Thank you very much, Philippe.
Bye-bye, everybody, and thank you for your very interesting questions and comments, etc. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.